So, it is now my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Dr. Rachel Nielsen, to lead a tabletop exercise. Rachel, over to you.
Hey everybody, welcome back after lunch. So I'm Dr. Rachel Nielsen. I'm the Director of Targeted Violence Prevention at the McCain Institute. Previously, I am a practitioner in the PPN and have been familiar with McCain's work for a while. I am out of Colorado, and so I have a lot of my Colorado folks in the room, which I appreciate. I'm going to steal a couple of things that we've used there, but knowing that every time we try to develop prevention, intervention programming anywhere, it needs to be context specific. So, our goal is to give some universal ideas, get everyone talking, but, none of us are coming with the ultimate answers. I think a lot of the success in Colorado in the leaner years were because of our relationships with one another. And I do want to thank CP3 for having the vision to put people in geographic regions to try to start getting these relationships built across sectors. So back in the day, Jenny Presswalla, who is still with CP3, started to get different social workers, correctional folks, U.S. Attorney's Office, practitioners, all in the same place to start talking about what is the issue, what were missed points of opportunity in other cases, what research might lend itself to this space since there's not a lot that is specific to targeted violence, and what could we as a state do about it. In 2019, we also had some technical support and funding from the National Governors Association. So what I'm going to do with you all is a little bit of a takeoff from what we did in that room in 2019 to try to get a sense of what do we already have that we can leverage in this space, and what is missing that is becoming apparent when we're trying to take what we already have and apply it to this space. Where are we falling short? Is it information sharing issues or concerns? Is it training? Is it the actual people? Is it another resource? Another issue is sometimes we'll have a resource, but we're not using it, right? Or we're just kind of barking at the wrong tree and approaching it in a way that's not effective when the tools are actually available and we're just not thinking about it that way. So for example, having it be a fairly new concept to have social workers, educators, and therapists in this space, have it not be a law enforcement driven issue. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through a case scenario. And originally, when I learned how to do this with groups, we use something called the nominal group technique. It's a way to gather and sort through different solutions to complex issues that don't really have a clear answer, but are also likely to evoke a lot of opinions and probably controversial opinions, potentially. But it's just one of multiple different kinds of scenario-based functional assessments. So Google this later when you have a chance, but there are different techniques that can help leverage the knowledge and the opinions of everyone in the room. In general, these different kinds of assessments have a number of positives. So one is it's going to help us develop our problem solving. One of the things that I recognized in running through different scenarios with other folks and having a year to play around with that is the stakes were not high. And what I said, what somebody else said they would have done in a fictional scenario or in a scenario of an attacker that had already been arrested was I can mess up in the room or I can say something that won't exactly work. and test that out, I can also see what other people are going to do in that scenario. So it built trust because I could see, I could hear over multiple cases what this law enforcement agency would do, what the FBI could and could not do, what would happen if it was a minor, what would be different if it was an adult, right? And play around with that. And I think that's really powerful to run through that, not just for, sussing out problems and gaps, but also to have trust among the team members and to recognize each other's professional limitations and the way that each profession makes decisions, because these cases never have one singular clear lead. We need to be able to all function together and to do what is appropriate for our professional lane. I think there's also a lot to be said about professional and ethical decision making, where the liability is spread and is better. Our decision making is better when you don't have one person making these decisions. And especially in a fledgling subfield, we definitely want more than one set of eyes on a case to make these decisions. It helps our learning experiences stick with participants. So I would ruin it if I tried to repeat it, but before lunch, somebody was saying essentially, you could teach it to me, but I'm going to understand it if I'm doing it. There was a study a number of years ago actually about human trafficking. And how do you get law enforcement to take on new approaches to helping human trafficking victims? Do you go at it by trying to get law enforcement to understand the struggles of human trafficking victims, to empathize, to know what those stories might be like so that they can better interview and understand the resistance of that client? Or what they found was actually more effective is you put protocols into place. You have systems, you have expectations, and then as officers do it, they pick it up and they understand it. But you get at it better by having protocols in place and then learning by doing. So let's use this as a safe space to play around with things that feel dangerous, but I think really lead us to feel competent and confident about our abilities to make decisions and then keep working as a case's risk increases or decreases. So finally, it allows us to just explore and kind of play with this material. And for those of us who work and learn differently, kinetically, verbally, we're not just reading stuff here. So we're going to have basically 2 rounds. So we're going to run through a scenario, and your all's exercise is going to be to talk about first, what are the challenges in this case? And you're going to find that much like real life scenarios, it is not clean cut. It is not laid out all pretty for us. There's a lot of professional judgment that could come in. And it should mirror about what it feels like to get a case like this. In fact, you might feel like you have more information than maybe you normally do in these scenarios. And then secondly, we'll take time to go back through and say, given those challenges, what could be done from your professional lens, from your agency standpoint? So just to run through it, you don't have to remember all of this, but I'm going to read off the case. You can mute me and read it yourself. We're sharing this scenario as well so that you can take notes. But after we go through it all together, then we're going to break up into groups. We were going to do 7 to 9 people. We were thinking, maybe we make it a little smaller, half a dozen. It's okay if it's 6, if it's 7. But the idea is let's throw people together that haven't normally worked together. Also very probably similar to how teams sometimes come together, right? Maybe you know them, maybe you don't, but here we go. And hopefully that everyone's coming from a different lens. One of the main pieces of this that I think is important is that before discussion starts, when we have a case, that we start writing down what concerns us, what we want to know about, what we don't understand, before we have the bigger discussion. And there's an important reason for that. The reason that this is set up to do it silently and then go around in order is because we don't want to go with the first idea. We don't want to go with the first idea that sounds good or viable, and we don't want to go with whoever's voice is loudest and defer. We do much better in managing cases and brainstorming if we do that before we cross-pollinate our ideas. So we will ask you to take a few minutes before you get going with your groups to write down your own thoughts before they get mixed in with everybody else's. Then we'll go around, get your ideas, let you all talk, and then we'll share out and see how similar these groups were. So this is a fictional scenario. This originally, this case has been changed over the years. Originally was given to me as kind of a conglomerate European case. In Europe, their laws are a little different around social services. Age becomes important here in terms of, in some other systems, after someone turns 18, they still have a lot of support and are eligible for services through social systems that are not necessarily true here. We've changed some of it to be a little more California specific, but I think generally speaking, this is representative of the kinds of gray area cases that people run into and struggle with the most. When they're low level, we know what to do with them. When they're about to attack, we know what to do with them. It's those kids and folks in between that we're worried about, and yet, what can we do? So I would encourage you to grab a scrap piece of paper for anybody that wants to kind of jot down thoughts as we're reading through. Some people think and learn that way. And then I will read this off as well. So for the folks online, we will assign you into virtual groups at the end of the scenario. And don't worry, we'll still be reminding you, okay, take a few minutes to brainstorm. Okay, now everybody share an idea. We'll give you the prompts. For the people that are in the room, we're gonna help facilitate the same process, but of course you've got me here to do a little shot calling. So as I'm reading through the scenario the first time, feel free to take notes if you want, if that helps you to keep track. Okay, so it's May 15th. Daniel is an only child and a senior at a local high school outside LA. He's been applying for colleges, and his father is concerned about the status of his applications since he is about to graduate. Daniel has been irritable as the school end nears, and he hasn't wanted to talk to his parents about his future plans in much detail. Maybe not unusual. While he is at school, Daniel's father hops on his son's laptop. It opens to this website, Stormfront. He notices an open thread on the white supremacist website. Daniel calls himself @Goat1488, and he has posted several logistical and travel-related questions regarding an anti-Semitic rally that's being organized by the Action Club. Daniel has been bragging on the site that he is going to go out in a big way at the end of his senior year. Daniel's father is worried that his son might try to travel to that rally, which is scheduled for mid-June in San Diego. So reminder, last slide, May 15th, mid-June. He worries that his son is just lost in general after the pandemic. Daniel is has always been bright and performed well in school. In fact, he skipped 8th grade and is still 17 years old. He was passionate about engineering before the COVID-19 pandemic, but now feels like the opportunities he once might have had have all but disappeared. Over the course of his senior year, Daniel has openly expressed his views against current policies on immigration, both on Snapchat and in class. He even wrote a sociology paper on minority groups and birth statistics that was alarming to the teacher. Because of his views, he's lost several longtime friends who don't want to associate with him anymore, and his attitude has caused a rift with his father. A few days later, Daniel's father is concerned about his son's lack of interest in participating in family activities and the amount of time he spends online. He decides to confront him, and he tells Daniel about the online material he saw on his laptop and says he's upset about the racist comments and hateful language that he saw in his postings on the Stormfront forum because they do not reflect the way he was raised. Daniel does not reply to his dad's questions and leaves the house. He returns home a day later. It's now late May. Dad runs into Bobby, who is a good friend of Daniel's, at a local store, and they start talking about graduation. The friend tells Dad that Daniel hasn't been hanging out with him anymore, and that he saw him with someone arrested for illegally possessing firearms. Dad's feeling hopeless, doesn't know what to do. He considers calling local law enforcement, but wonders how they would respond. Instead, he calls the school resource officer at Daniel's high school, which is against his wife's wishes. Daniel's mother says this is just a phase, and their son has been through enough with all the pandemic. The SRO informs Dad that a few months ago, Daniel appeared to be under the influence of alcohol. He doesn't have a criminal record. He's never been suspended or expelled from school. And his graduation is in 2 weeks. And then summer begins. So, that is our scenario that we're going to grapple with for the next little bit. So, again, the 2 rounds are, what are the challenges? And I don't want to overly define that for you, right? Your challenges, your questions, your concerns, whatever verb you want to stick in there, right? And then the second round will be, and what are you going to do about it, okay? So with the scrap piece of paper you have or your scenario, we're going to go through the rounds. So like I said, you're going to take a few minutes just to yourself to be thinking about this, get your thoughts down, and then we'll move on to sharing out with the groups. So again, for those in the room, I'm going to need you to get yourselves into groups of about 6 people. And online, Neil is going to help to break you into different groups. Again, don't worry, it's actually a good thing if you end up in a group where you don't know folks. So I'll give you a minute to get sorted physically around the room. Whoever your closest neighbors are. You'll take the time to go around to get an idea from everybody, and then your group will choose your top 3 concerns, and that will get shared out to the larger group. Okay, so by now, probably everybody in the group has shared out an idea, and hopefully we're at discussion about what your top 3 concerns or challenges are going to be for your group. So how are we doing? Are we thumbs up if you're ready? Okay, still talking. Sounds good. I like that. Okay, I got 1 thumbs up. So we have a couple minutes left to wrap up your decision making around the top 3 and choose who is going to be your speaker, because we will come around with a mic and ask you for your top 3.
They're not. We both bark, we both bite, but one is trying to protect them and the other is trying to hurt them. And the wolves would be cunning and conniving to lure them over, to have them think they're there to help them and either devour them, where the sheepdog will bark and bite them to keep them in the thing. So they will gravitate more to the wolf than to the sheepdog. And they will get devoured by it, because when they realize they made a mistake, it's too late.
We get people to voluntarily give up their firearms. Like that's one way we've done things. Like it's not a legal means. It's just a
we're all the sheepdogs here, but most of the people we're trying to
we know you're an
protect
expert.
fear us more than the wolves we're trying to protect them from.
So,
Or hate us
but in
because
America, it's a
the wolf
different.
that just stays around there and lures them and acts like they're going to protect them until it eats them, then it's
But
too late.
in Canada,
Where
you're in
the
a
sheepdog their whole life
group,
has been forcing them to do what they don't want to do.
or else give your firearms.
It's that simple and that complicated.
Did you? Make sure you can.
No, that's not even a question.
Okay, so I think we have enough folks that have made the decision or seconds from making their decisions. So let's go with the first brave souls who will share out their team's ideas. So again, this first round is just about the challenges of the case. What is the struggle? What's concerning? What are you picking out? So Brett, I'm going to pick on your group first, whoever wants to be the speaker. But what did your group decide were 3 very concerning items from this case?
So for us, we chose timeline and everything that goes in with that, lack of pro-social, and then family involvement / engagement.
Okay. Do you want to say any more about that to give it a little context about how your team talked about it?
Yeah, so with timeline, we've got 2 weeks till graduation. We got the impending rally down south or north, whatever, down in San Diego, currently south of us.
Yeah.
We got lack of pro-social activities, isolation, friend group loss, involvement in just about everything in life. And then family engagement / involvement. Mom and dad are on different pages about what's going on with kiddo. There's some disparities there as far as who's doing what, how they're approaching the subject. So a united front can go a long way, and some education for the family as well.
All right. Thank you so much. Next group that's willing to throw your concerns out. Should we just go to the next table?
Is this one? What am I missing? Oh,
There you go.
there we go.
Yeah.
So our top 3 challenges or concerns were one about the timeline, and I'll just add to the 2 things you mentioned that also this is a 17-year-old and a soon to not be high school student. So on top of the other sort of time pressure concerns, he may be about to time out of whatever services he's eligible for as a minor and as a student and suddenly belong to a totally different set of people who don't know he exists yet as an adult and a non-student. Also, we talked a little bit about the challenge that no one seems to be taking this super seriously except maybe Dad, but Dad brings some of his own, hey, this isn't how you were raised, so it's more of a personal front, or at least a personal front mixed with a concern. Mom seems to be minimizing and protective, and the school resource officer probably is just overwhelmed, but says this is a good student. And so who is it who's concerned enough to piece together all of the different puzzle pieces coming from the internet search and the friend group and everywhere else? And our third concern was, help me out, you guys. Oh, wait, was the threat level? Was also a concern, although that's another one too. The concern that, it's not super clear exactly what level of intervention needs to happen. He hasn't committed a crime. He doesn't appear grossly mentally ill. He hasn't like crossed any really solid lines yet, but it's clear that something needs to happen. And so what is the appropriate intervention and who is the best person poised to, have a productive and empathic conversation with him?
And I'll just take note of something that you said on your second concern about who is worried, who's kind of not, but that's what it's coming down to, is who is most worried is kind of becoming the lead, it sounds like. That's what's going to define it right now?
Yeah, and is that person, like, for example, Dad, really savvy enough in terms of, like, does he know what his handle means? Does he know how to access social media sites? Does he know this friend who hasn't seen him in 2 months?
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you. Moving to my left. Yes.
Testing. There we go. Okay. Yeah. So our first concern was the online presence. We also saw it in his handle, GOAT 14 and 88. But there are also 3 distinctly different issues. So maybe he's not entirely focused or hasn't made up his mind yet. The other issue that we saw was that he's been distanced from all of his friends. So he's no longer with all of his friends and everything that he saw. And the third item of concern is that he was hanging out with that individual that is a known weapons concern. So those are the 3 biggest things of concern. But also, because we got done, we also looked at the 3 positive things, which ironically, being 17 was one of them, because he's still a minor, so there's a lot he can't do without parental consent. So that was we saw that as a plus, not as a minus. And then we saw that his dad was keeping a close eye on him and keeping an eye to make sure he doesn't go over the deep end. So if there's any leakage, his dad will be sure to report it. And then the third thing we saw was that the school resource officer at least is aware and may not be as concerned as he should be, but at least is aware and knows the kid from before. So that can be a possibility for who they eventually decide to bring in to reach out to this guy. But so, and he is a very smart kid. That's right. Oh yeah, yeah. Because the GOAT is, anarchy for the most part. 14 is anti-government, and 8 is anti-Semitism for the Heil Hitler. So it's like those are 3 very different, and in this day and age for the young kids, they're normally one of the 3, they're not all 3. So his handle is a warning, but it's also like, is he being smart enough to not let us know which one he's doing? Because he's a smart kid, so it's like, it's hard to tell.
Well, so the cat's out of the bag. If you didn't catch anybody on the call, if you saw the GOAT 1488, We did try to throw in like greatest of all time, right? Kind of a kid reference. But 1488, if you do run into these things where you wonder if it means something or not, ADL has a great like database to look up symbols, numbers, words like that. And, theirs is going to say similarly, 14 is the 14 words, 88 is HH, Heil Hitler. And so, there are so many of these things that we just don't necessarily pick up on, that's another strength of having a whole group of folks to catch these memes, cartoons, terms, whatever, because they keep changing. Thank you. All right, let's go to the table in the back. Who's our speaker?
So we, in true fashion of a multidisciplinary threat assessment team, actually have 4 things instead of 3.
Didn't listen to the instructions. Neither did the previous group with the strengths, but I like this.
That was our group consensus. So in no particular order, because I think as we were talking about this, we all kind of had sort of, there were different behaviors that we observed, or different factors that sort of stood out to different folks more so, but they were isolation. So although he's not completely isolated because he's replaced his friend group with an unhealthy group of individuals, he is isolated from the relationships that he had that were long-standing and healthy. To the best of our knowledge, we think that they're healthy with friends and with his father. Then we also talked about, as sort of one factor, this both online and offline engagement that he's having with these toxic ideologies, like individuals in the movement and individuals with access to firearms. So like as a whole, it's not just the online or the offline, it's actually the combination of those things, which is actually much more higher risk. Then we looked at access to firearms, and something really interesting came up. We were talking about, well, it's potential access to firearms because we can't really verify whether this person that he hangs out with, who we don't even know their name, actually has firearms, but it's still concerning in light of all the rest of the context that we have as well, right? And so with potential access to firearms, with some of the other factors that we discussed about the threat of homicidal behavior and suicidal behavior, or both of those sort of co-occurring. And then the last thing we talked about was breakdown in communication. So talking about how the conversation that was had earlier about the parents sort of being on a different page, but also mainly father's inability to connect with his son about this issue and the way that they were engaging in each other, and like his son not engaging with him as well, like not having a response when he tried to confront him about it, that sort of thing.
Great. Thank you so much. And we have one more live group, and then I'll rely on Neil to help us with our online folks.
All right. Our group also had more than 3, but many of them have been said by others, so I'm going to try to consolidate a little bit. We were very concerned, of course, about the question of the access to firearms. We don't know, and obviously that's an open-ended question that we would want to have answered. We were concerned about that social environment for him, both that lack of pro-social connections as he's becoming socially isolated in the real world with his former group of friends, but what clearly looks like in an online engagement with a violent far-right extremist social network. We were worried about his lack of future plans, and the statement he was going to go out in a big way was very concerning, because that both has implications that can sound like either suicide or mass violence. And concerned also about, with that lack of future plans and that imminent graduation, the loss of structure in his life, that he will no longer have a structured day, a place where he has to go and at least interact with some pro-social people throughout the day. And then we were also concerned about the fact that his parents don't seem to be on the same page about the response to take.
Excellent insight. Thank you. Over to Neil.
Thank you. So we had one shy group in online, but we had one active group, and they identified that their top concerns were people being dismissive. So the mom and the resource officer, clear steps towards radicalization with the website, and vulnerable to that, so views and losing friends. And then lastly, aging out and moving into unfamiliar territory, which is, I know has been said before.
All right. Okay, so we've talked through the case. I'm going to keep flipping through the slides for you all just so you can see, the details still. We're going to go back through the same process, but now with actions. So take a few minutes personally. Yes, Heidi. You are a person who's gotten called into this team informally because this is somehow on your desk. So if you're a therapist, this must be one of your clients. If you're a school administrator, this is a kid at your school. If you're an educator, this kid is in your classroom, right? So if this kid came to your attention in the role that you're in now, if you got that safe to call, safe to help tip, and this was the information you got, what would your natural next steps be? Okay. So, you're going to be thinking individually as, you in your role before we roll out to the larger issue of now how does the team think about it and what are your team decisions going to be about next steps, okay? So, again, we're going to take a few minutes about, given what you're seeing in this case, as a psychologist, as an SRO, as a threat assessment professional, whatever your role really is, and you heard about this case, what could you do? And then we'll go around, share an idea, vote, just like we did with the first round. I will throw out, this might also be where you need to get more in the weeds about information sharing, about notifications, about assessments, about, the trickiness of his age and the end of the school year. So I'm trying to guess behavioral language here. It looks like everyone's still discussing, but I'm guessing by timeline, we're probably moving into voting soon. Seems like people are still having good talks, though. Okay, so the second round sometimes goes a little faster because we've already kind of absorbed ourselves in the story. Just want to get a show of hands of who's ready with their top 3 to go around. Got 1, 2. Okay, no, I think we're good then. All right, so same deal here. We're going to go back through your top 3 actions that as a team you thought would be good next steps. Do we want to go same order, different speaker? Oh, let's start in the back. Yes.
Yeah, we can get it over with.
Next steps. Let's do it.
So again, like it was hard to sort of name 3 things because we thought that there were a couple of things that should be happening at the same time. One of those was just sort of collecting some more information. So like based on our previous conversation about like, does this person have access to weapons? Like, what does this behavior mean? Just trying to get a better sense of what that looks like. We didn't talk about this, but actually I just thought about it. Like even when it comes to the access to weapons question, if we can confirm that that person does, that may actually dictate who goes and tries to contact this person, right? There might be some inherent danger to who tries to do follow-up with that person. And also maybe some danger to parents in the home. We also talked about making an immediate specialist referral. Again, this is like a best case scenario. Let's say we have access to Life After Hate or somebody like that. We have these clear indications that this person is at least has some sort of affinity to a far right ideology. So why not bring somebody in who's better understand this to do education for the parents, for the folks at the school, including the SRO, any counselors, any teachers. We may find out that there are other assignments that people sort of didn't know what the behavior meant, and it may just sort of give us a better picture of what's going on. We also talked about just sort of doing a range of assessments to get a more clear, holistic picture of what's going on with this individual. So again, stuff we talked about, behavioral threat assessment, potentially violence risk assessment, maybe a suicide assessment, maybe a needs assessment, all of those sorts of things, right? Trying to just get a good sense of what we should do and make an informed decision going forward. And then we also, there were the 2 last things where we talked about the need to sort of put some sort of support resources in place while we just figure out what we're doing. And we just sort of talked about potential crisis stabilization so that we can put some buffers in place while we're figuring out what we should do next. And then the last piece, we just had sort of a healthy debate about whether we should notify law enforcement immediately at this space. And it was really around the conversation of imminence, whether it's like homicide or suicide, because we have, to Sarah's point earlier, this clear statement that I'm going to go out with a bang. With the timeline that Tim talked about earlier. Again, we don't know if this is a potential indication for suicide or homicide, and then those risk factors are there because there's potential substance use. This is an adolescent who potentially has access to a firearm and is having some emotional challenges. So that's kind of where we were.
I do want to draw attention to the fact that your group was talking about which kind of assessment. Do we need more than one assessment, right? That risk is different than threat. That's different than a welfare check. That's different than a psychological evaluation, right? So, and that probably more than one could be leveraged to help your team out. So great. Should we go here? Okay, great.
We took pretty much a similar approach, but one of the things we looked at was things can occur simultaneously. You can begin to delve into what level of radicalization has taken place at the same time. But the main thing, the primary thing, the first thing to do is someone needs to sit down with the young man and have a conversation to see exactly where his head is, because there might be some redemption. You may be able to salvage him based upon how far into this he has gone. We also looked at how many people and who should be the best person to have this initial contact. Someone has to have a relationship, and I think oftentimes we defer to whose responsibility is it, and sometimes that's not the best approach. The best approach could be who has the best rapport and can have that conversation with them. The other is looking at putting together or a threat assessment team or process to determine what do we have, where can we go with this, and look at, is there a chance for us to get this young person on the right track. Also, we did agree with if the law enforcement is not already embedded into the threat assessment process, sometimes the worst thing you can do is have the officers involved, because then it becomes about what do we have here, what's the crime, where are we going to go with it, and sometimes that's detrimental to the whole process. But looking at it from the standpoint of,
So you're saying to not involve law enforcement quite yet, to hold on because that's going to shift the nature
unless they're
of
embedded, and hopefully they're already embedded in the threat assessment process for that campus. So, but not initially defer to them right off the bat, because that could have some negative consequences.
We also meant by that also have them active in the background where he's not aware of their involvement, so it doesn't become a trigger for him. That was kind of like the thought behind that, because we want their input and their protection, but we don't want to make him aware of their presence unless, in the case of the school safety resource officer, he already has a relationship with him and he wouldn't feel threatened from it. But we wouldn't bring any additional law enforcement that would be visible to him, the mom, or the dad to create a trigger.
Okay. Which sounds like you're kind of thinking, similarly to the last group. And yeah, so
Where things have to go is the officers have to be embedded already. If you're bringing them in as a result of this is what we have, as opposed to sitting at the table and being a part of the ongoing threat assessment process and become familiar, it's too late.
Okay. Thank you. Who's ready to go next out of our live group?
How about now? Our table has representatives from education, public health, and the federal government, so we all see this through different lenses. As far as the federal government's concerned, I'm with CP3, and the next step that could be taken might be to look through the Prevention Practitioners Network to find out what of those 900 organizations
Yes,
can be
sir.
helpful at a local level. Yes, we're funding it, but that's not why I'm saying it. But I mean, everybody has a different lens, and we're trying to leverage the tools that are out there, and identifying what services are available in the geographic place where this person is something that I would be doing in my role as a field representative. But I'll turn it over to my public health and my education colleagues for their lenses as well.
One of the things that we talked about representing Get Safe in the community side of things is the dad was identified in our group as being a key leverage point. He has a lot of information, but he likely does not have the resources to be able to gain support, and to be able is probably the most likely to report if this escalates. So things that we could give him of tips to look for, like if a firearm actually enters the house, that raises the level of what's going to be happening. So to provide that more community-based and understandable piece for him to be on the lookout, and hopefully get other people that have already been identified in this scenario also being able to assess the situation before it can escalate, then that gives us an opportunity to hopefully stop something before it ever gets into all these other levels that we also discussed.
Oh, is this the, I guess this is the route for our team. I had a very specific one, just trying to keep myself relevant, which was that because of this kid's age and the fact that he's exhibiting some symptoms of social withdrawal and isolation and falling off the social curve of interaction, that he should be assessed for a psychotic disorder, which is very, very rarely the cause of threats of mass violence, but he is the age where it strikes young men, and that needs to be ruled out, because if this is indeed like the prodromal phase of schizophrenia, and that's what's leading him into these strange beliefs and this sort of change in personality, that is a very different pathway than the sort of community and peer-based pathways that he probably will need to embark on.
I have to say, in the different iterations of this, that is a new comment about, honing in on his age. And seriously, we know from mental health, like 17, 18, 19, 20, freshman, sophomore year in college, very dangerous time for kids to be in crisis, as they're maybe away from family, in unfamiliar territory, around other kids, maybe have access to drugs, alcohol, and a proclivity for mental health issues. Yeah. So I think that's wonderful that you raised that point. All right, next table.
We had kind of three main buckets that we wanted to address. One was, of course, the weapons issue, and because we do have representatives from law enforcement on our team, we were talking about the possibility of whether a gun violence restraining order might be applicable in this case, or a report to the Joint Regional Intelligence Center. We also wanted to just figure out who could go and check for a weapon and actually search the bedroom, search the car, who could safely do that. We also talked about addressing the parents, both in terms of assessment of both of their perspectives on this, what information they have about the situation, what their perceptions are, and then maybe some skills work with them around setting healthy boundaries with him and consequences, how to interact with him in a productive way. And then finally, we talked about some kind of work with him as an individual, assessing him more thoroughly. And we did talk about various types of assessment, whether it be really a behavioral threat assessment focus, whether if I was there as a clinical psychologist doing the TSAM, which is for targeted violence, strengths, risks, and management, assessment of both the risk and the management of that risk. As well as possibly having a social worker if they were involved in life after hate. A social worker could do an assessment to look at more practical things like what's he going to do when he graduates? What kind of practical skills does he need to apply, and what kind of resources can we get him connected with in order to meet those just practical behavioral needs? And then maybe connecting him with a peer mentor, a former, because someone who's involved in the violent far right may be more willing to talk to somebody who understands that culture and that can be that cultural broker.
Excellent. Different take from the law enforcement perspective. And you mentioned who could look for guns. What kind of a check is that in California? Is a welfare check going to get that? I was eavesdropping a little bit on your group, and I heard some discussion around that.
Consent. Yeah, it would really depend on the welfare check. I mean, we would try to get consent and cooperation as much as possible, but based on what's being described as how our young gentleman is being, I don't think he's going to be cooperative. But if it's the parent's home and the parents are the ones who can give us consent, then and they want to comply and work with us, then I think that's the route we would try to go. Same with, did we talk about social media? Yeah, like if we want to look at the social media, but the kid's not consenting or wanting to show it to us, then the parents can just take his electronics and hand it over to us so we can take a look at it.
Okay. I will add, so much of social media is open source that a lot of people that are doing this are not, well, at least initially, are either not savvy enough or don't care and want to broadcast it enough to have it on open source platforms. Now, you do have some folks that they go encrypted and, we're relying on, hopefully someone seeing that and reporting because it is deeper than we can see. But for folks that are looking at kids doing, threat assessments, so much of that is just there. And there are ways to put in search terms that will hit different platforms. So you're not going on Instagram, going on Facebook, going on Snapchat, right? And don't do it on your own account. Don't come to everybody else's radar by doing your searches. The other reason that I raised the issue about is this a welfare check is, actually we're in a state where there was a classic example of that, right? So Isla Vista, there was a welfare check done, but because of the way that it was called in, they're making sure that that kid was okay, not doing the weapons search, and then he committed his attack. So we need to be really specific about what we're asking for and why we're asking for it. And if we have someone who's suicidal, could they do that in a public place or take out other people with them? Or if they're homicidal, are they also suicidal? You're just hearing about the anger towards others. These things go hand in hand with people in crisis. Okay, what other groups do we have? Yes.
So the first thing that we thought of is that somebody needs to sit down with this kid and get his views on things, get his thoughts, see how he's thinking, see what his thinking is as far as the future goes. And then our second one was to get a multidisciplinary team together to evaluate what he's told us. What was our third one? And then the third one was to identify somebody in his life that could make an approach to him, since Dad doesn't seem to be willing to or isn't able to connect with this kid.
Yeah, he's trying, but it's not very effective, seemingly. So you're starting out in a very natural place. Have a conversation, see how it goes, right? And with all of these things, we're testing it out. We're seeing what works, what doesn't, and then we go back to the drawing board. All right, Neil, if you can help us out with our folks online.
Happy to. Group 1, for their 3 actions, they wanted to do an intelligence or analysis to get more information on him, the friend with the gun, his posts, then get him in for a risk assessment and maybe treatment somehow. Not sure if parents or school could make that happen. And then more conversations with school. Might have been other flags. We also then had another group 2. Their 3 actions were, if an administrator, if a school has a behavioral threat assessment and management team and process along with the SRO, they should conduct a threat inquiry to include collateral information, friends, parents, teachers. Due to potential weapon access, the SRO follow up with local agency and law enforcement in other communities. School team to reach out to therapists if available. If this came to the community therapist from phone call from dad to a therapist, therapists might not know about the school component or about the threat assessment. So therapists should try to schedule a family session, support youth, but also assess the perspective and thought process, emotional control. So if there's a concern about suicidality or homicidality ideation, then possible hospitalization. If they refused a family session, the therapist has collateral contact with both parents. And if concerning behaviors became known to the therapist without the threat assessment training, they have to decide to exercise their duty to protect, contact law enforcement, and possibly also the school.
Great contingency planning, right? Which is how it ends up, right? You start there and then you figure out what they respond to and what they don't. So thank you all for thinking so thoroughly and sharing your lens. I think we came up with a lot of different answers, different approaches, but all valuable. And this is really what we see as the answer, is that, you know, we are taking all of these approaches and seeing which kids respond to what things to get them off the pathway to violence. So we've talked, you know, we've brainstormed, okay, what would I personally be worried about? What would I do possibly as a next step? What would I within a team think about and do? What about your organization as a whole? So this is what I'm going to leave you with, is to consider, you know, as of today, if this case came to your organization's attention, if it was referred to you, how would you respond, given what you already have in place? So, you know, if you're part of a gang unit and somehow this ended up coming to your attention, are those services actually going to meet this kid's needs or not, right? Does your school have safety planning and threat assessment and management services that are robust enough to handle this, et cetera? Secondly, what does this start to get you thinking about in terms of who else might be valuable at the table to help with an intervention, to help with assessing the case, with being a positive influence, right? We wanted a mentor. We wanted to find maybe not necessarily who was like the lead because they're most responsible ultimately, but who's the lead because they're influential and may have the best outcome. So who are you not talking with that could be leveraged in this space? A lot of folks, until they go to a training or they end up with a case, they don't see themselves in the work. And then they go to the training and they're like, oh my gosh, I see these cases all the time. I just didn't think about it as quote unquote targeted violence. So who else do you want to pull in? And then third, do you have ideas about what else you would need to feel competent? So if you do have concerns about liability, or I don't know which assessment it would be, or we don't have somebody for that, is it personnel? Is it training? Is it networking? Is it a referral process, right? So what is feeling not good about this case? But, my hope is that this doesn't seem totally foreign, although there may be differences, that there are hopefully similarities in this case and what you all see, right? That it's not straightforward. There's not one clear lead. There's not one intervention. There's not one reason this kid is struggling. It's multiple, right? Since we do have a few minutes left, I do want to open it up for questions and comments, because we do have so much knowledge in this room. And again, with our participants online, if there were things that came up in your discussions that you thought are, worth bringing up to the rest of the group or sharing out, I would really welcome that, especially from the different disciplines. Oh, you still have it.
I still have it. I don't really know where to look, but I can turn this way. I just wanted to pick up on something that this table said, which made me so happy, which was about a gun violence restraining order. That was a piece of legislation I helped work on and provided testimony for when it came up in California. And I used to give a lot of talks, well, I still do, but back then when I was giving talks to law enforcement and like forensic psychologists and forensic psychiatrists, people doing threat assessment all the time. And I would always say, like, who's ever heard of the gun violence restraining order? And it would be like crickets. So I'm so glad that that is something that is out there and people are thinking about. And for those who don't know about it, it's a piece of legislation where, in the absence of criminal activity and in the absence of any kind of mental health history, if somebody's making threats, credible threats of serious violence, law enforcement and family members, and in California now some school officials and employers, can apply for a civil order to have firearms from the home removed, firearms they possess removed, and to put a purchase prohibition in place. Law enforcement can get an emergency order, or law enforcement and family can get an ex parte order, and then there's an order after hearing after a few weeks. And the Violence Prevention Center that I work with has done some research on this. Turns out they're actually most effective in preventing suicide, even though they were designed to prevent mass shootings. But there's a lot of good evidence that they have prevented a number of mass shootings as well. And even though in California you have to be 21 to purchase a firearm legally anyway, there is sort of a way in which, with minors, particularly if parents are not working with you, there can be a role for these. It's a little bit of a technical loophole, but suffice to say, don't rule it out just because you're working with a minor, because it can still be effective. This actually stemmed from the Isla Vista shooting, when that was the real impetus for getting this pushed forward into the legislation. Yeah.
So we were at a training in San Francisco, and that came up. I just was going to ask, because we were all kind of confused, when can the weapons be returned?
So at the hearing, the respondent will have a chance to testify, and the judge can return them at that time, or the judge can extend the order. I think it's like 6 months, a year, and now there's a 5 years, or it can get renewed every year. So I can't remember if there's a way you can go back while, if the judge says it's going to be a year, if you can go back in 9 months and plead your case. There probably is. But generally, there's a series of time frames at which the order would either expire or come up for renewal in California. I think it varies with states. Right now, 19 states have this, including the District of Columbia, and some other states are considering it. And it varies slightly by state.
Yes. So that was kind of a big thing in our group, because if the threat isn't valid and the gun owner loses rights to everything. So it was kind of we had one guy who was a hard charger. He goes, "Gotta do that right now, right now, right now." And we're all kind of, well, let's wait and make sure the threat is valid and everything, because it is a loss of rights in a sense. So, I mean, not saying it's not a valid thing, but you know, it has to be really evident that there's a reason to use it. That's it.
And just one more thing, and then I'll shut. But it is a civil order, and it is state only, and it is time limited. So after that 6 months or that year or whatever, your rights are fully restored within your own state and federally to own a firearm. And there's nothing on your criminal history.
Thank you. So even though that it sounds like it's California specific, you know, 19 other states. Sorry, I missed that part. You know, with ERPO laws and whatnot, I mean, I've also heard some creative things around essentially storage lockers that can be used for guns where, you know, friends, family, civilly, you can opt to have your guns put away voluntarily for a portion of time. And I'm not surprised, and I'm very pleased that it's helping the suicide rate as much as it is. Other thoughts, comments, questions? All right, you guys have been working hard, so we'll give you a few minutes back. We're going to take a break here and then get started again with another panel. Thank you all so much.